Of course I thought the party would prove something. 37 candles, 2 speeches, 1 silver knife beside the cake. I watched myself smile like a woman who had nothing to hide. By the end of the night, my husband knew exactly who I had become. And the worst part was that everyone else knew before I could deny it. Of course, I thought control looked clean behind those glass conference room walls. 2 clients, 1 crisis deck, no message from Arjun during the meeting again. I watched myself smile, calm enough to make nervous men trust me completely. My name was Zofia Markova, and I was 37 that autumn morning. I worked as a senior crisis communications strategist for people who feared headlines. That meant I turned panic into sentences others could safely repeat later. People called me sharp, composed, useful in rooms where truth became dangerous. I liked those words because they sounded stronger than lonely ever sounded. Of course, lonely was too dramatic for a woman with my calendar. I had a husband, a flat, good shoes, and birthday plans pending. Arjun and I had been together 7 years, married for 4 already. He was a patent lawyer, careful with words and careless with silence. Once that silence had felt peaceful, like shade after a bright street. On Sundays we used to walk to the old cinema near home. We bought separate tickets, then argued softly about whose film looked better. Afterward, he always kept both stubs inside his coat pocket for weeks. I used to find them while checking laundry and feel privately chosen. That was before his father became ill and everything practical swallowed him. Meals appeared, bills were paid, medicine was collected, but questions disappeared slowly. He loved through action and expected me to hear words inside it. Of course I tried because good wives understand quiet men, apparently. Still, quiet started pressing on my chest like a hand at night. At work, I corrected a client for saying sorry too early publicly. Everyone laughed, and I watched myself become valuable in that instant again. Later, Arjun arrived with dinner because I had forgotten to eat lunch. He placed the bag beside my laptop and touched my shoulder lightly. He asked whether something had changed because I told him less lately. I heard blame, though his face looked more tired than accusing. I said work was heavy, and he knew how December became impossible. He nodded too quickly, accepting the answer before I respected it myself. 2 containers. 1 cold curry. No real conversation between us that evening. When Nora saw Matteo's name flash later, she only raised 1 eyebrow. The next morning, Matteo messaged before Arjun finished making coffee in our kitchen. Of course, I told myself old names did not become dangers by themselves. His message looked harmless, asking whether my birthday dinner needed better music tonight. I watched myself read it twice, then placed the phone screen down carefully. Arjun stood rinsing mugs, his sleeves rolled with that quiet domestic patience beside me. He asked whether the office needed me early again because my face changed. I said a client problem had returned, and the lie arrived too easily. 1 sentence, 1 lowered screen, no thunder from the ceiling above us yet. Matteo had been my ex before Arjun, but I called him harmless history. History sounded safer than hunger, and hunger sounded too ugly for breakfast anyway. At noon, Matteo appeared outside my agency with coffee from the corner kiosk. He remembered oat milk, cinnamon, and the exact plastic lid I always hated. That kind of remembering is dangerous when marriage has become mostly daily logistics. He said I still walked like people should turn their heads after me. I laughed because laughing gave me time to decide what I wanted next. Of course, I thought wanting attention was different from wanting another man anymore. He asked about Arjun with a softness that made the question feel generous. I told him Arjun was good, which was true and still not enough. Matteo looked at me like goodness was a small room without windows anymore. That look did something embarrassing inside me, something 13 years old and waiting. I watched myself lean closer, though the pavement was not crowded anymore that day. He did not touch me, which made everything easier to excuse afterward, in silence. 2 coffees, 1 old voice, no visible betrayal for anyone passing us outside. When I returned upstairs, Camille glanced from my cup to my face again. She noticed details professionally, which was why our clients paid her well enough. I said the kiosk had changed suppliers, though nobody had asked anything yet. Camille only nodded, but her silence had edges I disliked immediately that afternoon. By evening, Matteo had sent 3 messages and 1 photograph from years before. It showed me at 28, laughing in a dress I forgot owning. Of course I should have deleted it without answering, like a careful wife. Instead, I wrote that I looked younger, and he wrote back impossible again. The words sat on my screen like heat under a closed door inside. I watched myself save the photograph, then hide it inside an old folder. That was my first active choice, though I named it harmless nostalgia then. At home, Arjun was reviewing hospital bills for his father at the table. He had made lentils, folded laundry, and left my portion covered neatly for me. The room smelled of cumin, detergent, and the small mercy of routine together. Routine should have comforted me, but it made me feel already archived already. Arjun asked about the client dinner I had mentioned the previous Thursday night. He said Camille told him the panel had ended around 8 exactly yesterday. His voice stayed even, which made me feel managed instead of married again. Of course, the truth was simple enough to speak and difficult enough alone. I had seen Matteo afterward, not planned, not innocent, not fully anything yet. Arjun asked what happened after 8, naming the hour without accusation that night. I heard a lawyer building a case, not a husband asking plainly then. That gap was where most of our marriage had begun breaking quietly already. I said he was turning tired evenings into evidence against me now again. He rubbed his eyes once, and that made me more defensive somehow there. He said he was asking because I had stopped coming home honestly now. The sentence should have hurt me cleanly, but I turned it sideways instead. I told him honesty required a home where feelings were not scheduled first. That was almost true, which made it more useful and more cruel then. Arjun closed the folder beside him and said he never meant scheduling aloud. He said he thought making time was better than missing conversations entirely again. Of course, he would say that because organization was his native language too. I watched myself stand before the tenderness in his explanation could reach me. I said I was tired and carried my plate into the bedroom alone. Behind the door, I messaged Matteo that marriage made kindness feel like paperwork. He answered that some people loved cages because cages looked responsible outside too. It was ridiculous, theatrical, exactly the kind of sentence I needed tonight then. Nora loved it when I read the message aloud the next afternoon later. We were in the agency kitchen pretending herbal tea was lunch again together. She said Matteo sounded dangerous, and her smile made dangerous sound flattering again. Nora had always lived close to my fire without burning her hands safely. She told me women like us became furniture if we behaved too well. Of course, she did not mean to push me toward a cliff alone. She only wanted my life to feel interesting enough to warm hers again. Still, permission often arrives dressed as friendship and carrying spare excuses between us. That evening, I wore lipstick Arjun had never noticed, and Matteo praised tonight. We met after work near the bookshop, under weak rain and neon together. He spoke about our old apartment street and how alive I seemed there. I did not correct the memory, though half of it was invented then. 1 touch on my wrist, 1 breath held, no promise spoken between us. When I came home, Arjun was awake on the sofa, shoes still on. He asked whether I had been with Nora because I smelled like rain. I said yes, and watched the second lie settle between us quietly there. He looked relieved for 1 second, which punished me more than suspicion inside. At the birthday planning dinner, Nora sat beside me and poured wine again. Layla asked whether Arjun wanted a smaller gathering, since crowds exhausted him lately. I joked that Arjun considered 3 people and a cheese plate overcrowded again. People laughed, but Layla did not, and Arjun lowered his fork beside me. The joke sounded light, yet it made his caution look ridiculous publicly there. Of course, I told myself couples teased each other all the time anyway. Camille arrived late, saw my phone glow and watched me turn it away. Matteo had written that birthdays revealed who wanted to celebrate your life properly. I deleted the preview fast, but not fast enough for Camille that evening. She said nothing because silence feels safer before damage has a name yet. When the guest list reached Matteo, Arjun looked at me for longer again. I called him an old friend and said inviting him proved maturity tonight. Arjun closed the list, nodded once and asked whether I was sure again. I heard control again, because control was easier to hate than fear again. So I smiled across the table and said of course I was anyway. Of course I chose the rooftop restaurant because glass made everything feel visible. I watched myself arrange place cards like a woman arranging proof for strangers. The private room smelled of rain, wool coats, champagne, and soft candle wax. Arjun arrived early with the cake because practical love always arrived early for me. He checked the menu twice and asked whether the music felt too loud. I heard management, not care, though his face only showed careful concern there. 2 candles broken, 1 silver knife. No quiet corner for our marriage tonight. Nora came in first, wearing red, already smiling at my possible trouble again. Of course, her voice carried curiosity, dressed as innocent friendship again that evening. I said he was an old friend, and watched myself believe nearly half. Camille brought a bottle and the watchful silence she used with difficult clients. Matteo arrived late, wet from rain, carrying nothing except confident attention for me. He hugged me longer than necessary, but short enough for denial afterward too, somehow. Arjun saw it, because husbands see what rooms pretend not to notice fully enough. He did not challenge anyone, which made me dislike him briefly, and unfairly. I wanted him jealous enough to prove I still mattered publicly to him. Instead, he asked Matteo whether he wanted sparkling water before wine started tonight. That kindness felt like weakness, because my wound needed stronger evidence that night. 1 offer, 1 pause. No easy enemy for me to name, yet there either. I sat between Arjun and Nora, facing Matteo across the polished table tonight. Matteo made small references only I understood from our old life together privately. A street in Madrid, a broken necklace, the song from my balcony once again. Each memory was harmless alone, but together they built a private room nearby anyway. Of course, I should have stopped answering with my eyes immediately then, completely. Instead, I smiled because being remembered felt like being chosen again publicly there. Layla noticed first, and her fork stayed still above her plate quietly then, completely. Camille noticed second, then looked toward Arjun, instead of toward me carefully again. Arjun noticed without showing it, which felt like another kind of refusal tonight. When the cake came out, everyone clapped too loudly in the warm room. Hugo lifted his camera, and I turned my face toward the light again. I wanted the footage to show beauty, friends, and a husband watching me. I wanted proof that I was not disappearing inside ordinary marriage anymore somehow. Matteo had been drinking quickly, champagne first, then whiskey from Hugo's table already. Nora touched my wrist once, warning or excitement, maybe both together then again. 2 glasses emptied, 1 grin sharpened. No one interrupted him soon enough there. Matteo stood before anyone asked for speeches and tapped his glass lightly twice. People laughed because charming men get permission before they request anything at parties. He said my birthday needed honesty, because I had always deserved honesty tonight. The room warmed around that sentence, not understanding its direction yet, at all. Arjun looked at me and I looked at the silver cake knife again. Of course I thought Matteo would flatter me and sit down afterward politely. He told them I used to hate being called sensible by anyone ever. Then he said Arjun was brave to marry a woman like me today. Matteo smiled wider and said some men loved stars by dimming rooms deliberately. I heard poetry first, not insult, because I wanted poetry too badly then. Arjun's hand moved from his glass to the edge of the table slowly. He asked Matteo to sit, and the quiet made the request heavier immediately. Matteo ignored him and said, "Dependable men often confused possession with devotion publicly." Layla said his name once, flatly, but he enjoyed the room anyway then. Then he lifted his phone and said, "Nobody understood my birthday wishes properly." I watched myself smile because stopping him would admit there was danger tonight. He read from screenshots, not every word, but enough dates and places allowed. A hotel bar near Paddington, a Thursday message, a joke about escape again. The room became still in pieces, face by face, chair by chair, slowly. Hugo lowered the camera slightly, but the red recording light stayed on anyway. Camille looked at me with professional disappointment, not surprise, and that hurt badly. Nora removed her hand from my chair as if it had burned suddenly. Matteo called Arjun patient, then made patient sound like a household appliance tonight. That was the humiliation, clear enough for everyone and cruel enough quietly there. Arjun did not raise his voice, which left Matteo looking drunker alone afterward. He said the toast was finished and asked Hugo to stop recording now. Hugo hesitated because he was hired by me, then lowered the camera slowly. I should have gone to Arjun, but performance still held my body upright. Of course, I chose the room instead of the person beside me again. I said Matteo was drunk and Arjun should not make drama tonight publicly. The words came out polished, like a statement prepared for another scandal entirely. What I meant was, please do not leave me exposed here alone tonight. What everyone heard was that my husband was embarrassing me by hurting publicly. Arjun looked at me then, not confused anymore, only newly distant now completely. He said quietly that I had made the answer public enough already tonight. That sentence opened something small and terrible beneath my ribs tonight, then closed. For 1 second I saw the table as he must see it clearly. My friends, my ex, my smile, his private pain served with cake tonight. I almost understood that being seen had not made me loved properly then. Then Layla stepped toward him, and I turned her concern into attack again. I told myself his family had been waiting to judge me anyway tonight. The door closed inside me, neat and final, like a press statement again. Nora looked down at her plate and did not rescue me again either. Layla left first, taking her flowers because they no longer belonged there anymore. Camille followed after saying she would call tomorrow about work logistics later today. Hugo packed his camera slowly, avoiding my eyes with professional care afterward too. Arjun picked up my coat from the chair, then left without it deliberately. The cake remained uncut, the silver knife clean except for melted wax there. I watched myself stand smiling until the last guest stopped pretending with me completely. Of course, the morning after looked ordinary enough to insult everyone involved completely. Rain pressed against our windows, and the living room smelled of extinguished candles again. 2 empty glasses, 1 ribboned gift bag, no husband beside me in bed anymore. I watched myself collect plates slowly, as if tidiness could make evidence disappear. Arjun had slept in the study where his father's medical folders usually lived overnight. The door was open, but his pillow had been folded with careful finality already. He stood at the dining table, folding the birthday tablecloth into exact squares alone. He had not changed clothes, which made the morning feel improperly continuous and wrong. Candle wax clung to one cuff, pale and stubborn against the blue cotton shirt. He stopped when he saw it, not angry, only tired beyond performance entirely. That small pause opened a door inside me before I could guard it properly. For 1 clean second, I saw what the room had done to him clearly. Not jealousy, not pride, not male embarrassment, despite what I preferred believing before. He had trusted me with his fear of becoming useful but invisible someday. I had handed that fear to Matteo, then let people laugh nearby anyway. The truth stood there with the tablecloth, quiet enough to be survivable then. I almost said I was sorry for the room, at least aloud then. Then my phone lit with Matteo's name, and I chose brightness again instead. I told myself sadness was easier after years of careful neglect anyway today. Of course, remorse would only let Arjun control the language first afterward too. So I turned the screen toward myself and wrote that he was unbearable. Arjun saw the movement, and something small left his face completely then again. He said later, indirectly, that my reflex had answered more than words clearly. I heard accusation because accusation gave me something solid to fight back against. I said he was dramatic now because witnesses had finally seen us clearly. He looked toward the tablecloth, then placed it inside a plastic bag carefully. One bag, one cuff, no shouting, and somehow the room narrowed sharply around. By afternoon, Layla asked us both to come for tea at hers together. Of course, tea meant judgment because families prefer porcelain when gathering knives politely. Arjun agreed before asking me, and I treated that as betrayal immediately there. Layla lived above a pharmacy, in a flat smelling of cardamom and soap. Her dining table held 4 cups, though only 3 people were expected there. That empty cup accused me more effectively than Layla managed at first alone. She asked why I let Arjun stand there while Matteo reduced him publicly. She did not call me names, which made her harder to dismiss later. I heard his sister defending territory, not a woman watching grief carefully enough. I said Matteo had been drunk, and everyone was making theatre afterward again. Layla answered that drunk people still choose where to point their cruelty carefully. Arjun sat beside her, hands folded, not looking like anyone's victim anymore today. That annoyed me because I needed him wounded enough to seem unreasonable there. He said the night was not separate from everything before it anymore now. He named the locked phone, the sudden contempt, and the disappearing evenings lately. He said he had watched me practice freedom by making him smaller publicly. Of course, the line was almost beautiful, which made me hate it immediately. I answered that he had made marriage feel like a weekly appointment lately. That was partly true, and partial truth always gave me temporary oxygen briefly. He looked down and said he thought appointments meant he was trying properly. Then his voice changed, not louder, only stripped of its usual structure entirely. He said he kept becoming easier, hoping I might come back eventually somehow. There was no strategy in it, only a tired man confessing failure plainly. I should have heard love there, damaged but still reaching toward me carefully. Instead, I heard self-pity, because drama belonged to me, not him alone anyway. Layla pushed her cup away, and tea spilled across the saucer quietly beside. That small brown ring spread wider while nobody moved to clean it away. I watched myself use controlled tenderness, because anger had stopped helping me there. I said I never wanted to hurt him, only to breathe again somehow. It sounded gentle, but I placed responsibility carefully outside my own hands again. Arjun noticed, because law had trained him to hear missing subjects immediately always. He said breathing was not the same as making another person vanish slowly. Of course, I called that poetic cruelty, though it was mostly accurate anyway. Layla stood then and said she would not translate my pain anymore today. Her leaving the table was soft, but the softness carried a verdict anyway. Back home, the hallway looked longer because Arjun walked ahead without waiting upstairs. He removed his wedding ring at the bathroom sink to wash wax off. The ring clicked once against porcelain, smaller than any sentence between us there. I watched the sound enter the room and choose a side quietly there. He did not put it back on after drying his hands again afterward. He placed it beside the soap, aligned with the toothbrush cup exactly there. 1 ring, 2 toothbrushes, no performance left for that private stage anymore now. I told myself it was theatre, because theatre could still be answered later. He opened his desk drawer and began sorting receipts into separate folders silently. Not angrily, not quickly, not even in front of me deliberately either then. The carefulness frightened me because carefulness meant he had stopped asking permission entirely. I messaged Nora from the bathroom, sending more words than dignity allowed then. She replied after 40 minutes that she did not know what to say. Of course, that meant she was tired, not leaving me already completely yet. Camille sent no message, though she had promised to call about logistics later. Hugo wrote only that he could send the raw footage when needed later. Needed by whom, I wondered, then hated myself for understanding too quickly anyway. Arjun slept in the study again, behind a door he left unlocked tonight. The unlocked door felt worse than a locked one would have felt tonight. It said I could enter, but there was no place waiting anymore inside. Before dawn, I found the tablecloth bag near his work satchel downstairs again. Candle wax showed through the plastic like something preserved instead of cleaned away. Of course, the next morning gave me silence instead of punishment from Arjun. I watched myself move through the flat as if quiet meant victory somehow. His wardrobe door stood open, and half his shirts were already gone by morning. 2 hangers, 1 missing suitcase, no explanation left where love had lived before. The study desk held labelled folders, stacked receipts, and my birthday tablecloth bag. That kind of order felt obscene after what everyone had seen already publicly. I told myself he was staging calm because anger had failed him publicly. Then I saw his ring still beside the soap, exactly where yesterday left it. The sight should have stopped me, but stopping required a kind of surrender. Instead, I opened my laptop and began writing my version before breakfast alone. The post was not accidental, not drunken, not dragged from me by panic. I chose every sentence with the same care I gave client statements professionally. I said marriages could look stable while one person was quietly disappearing inside. I said some partners called control responsibility because it sounded kinder in public. I did not name Arjun, which made the post worse, not better somehow. Everyone knew enough, and the unnamed man became easier for strangers to judge. I included the calendar detail because it was true and beautifully damaging online. He had scheduled difficult conversations as if pain needed available meeting slots first. Of course, that was not the whole marriage, but it worked online beautifully. 1 upload, 3 comments, no mercy left inside my careful wording anymore today. Camille saw the post before noon and stopped outside my office door quietly. She asked whether I understood this was no longer only domestic conflict anymore. I heard corporate caution, not concern, because caution had always bored me deeply. I said women were allowed to tell the truth about emotional neglect publicly. That sentence sounded brave while hiding the smaller thing I had done completely. Camille looked at my screen, then at me, with tired professional distance again. She said truth used as pressure was still pressure, whatever language covered it. I watched myself dismiss her because being understood mattered less than being believed. By evening, Arjun returned with a folded garment bag and no anger showing. He placed his keys in the bowl, then removed 2 from the ring. The sound was small, metallic, and final enough to thin the air sharply. He said indirectly that the post needed to come down before morning arrived. He said if anything remained worth saving, it had to leave public performance. I heard him asking for control when he was actually asking for privacy. That difference should have mattered, but my pride was louder than comprehension then. I told him he only cared because other people had finally witnessed us. He did not defend himself immediately, which made my accusations stand there breathing. Then I said the one true thing neither of us could dodge anymore. I said he made our marriage into appointments where feelings waited for permission. His face changed, not because it was false, but because it landed cleanly. Of course, being right gave me the old oxygen for a moment there. I watched myself use that oxygen to keep the wound open wider still. Arjun said he knew he had hidden inside usefulness for too long already. He said he thought doing everything correctly would prove he was staying forever. The sentence was plain, and that plainness made it harder to fight back. He asked me to stop making the room larger than the marriage itself. That was his final honest offer, though I called it management inside myself. I answered that I had already been alone while standing beside him anyway. It was almost true, which made it sharp enough to injure both people. Arjun folded his hands once, then stopped trying to explain anything further tonight. He said he would handle matters properly, and the softness frightened me badly. No threat followed, no dramatic exit. Only a man becoming logistical before me. 2 bags, 1 folder, no raised voice in the flat anymore that night. Of course, I called his calm punishment because punishment was easier to understand. He began listing ordinary arrangements about bills, mail, and temporary sleeping space calmly. I became louder because ordinary words sounded like doors closing from inside everywhere. He became quieter because he had finally stopped asking me to hear him. The asymmetry made the room feel tilted, though nothing physical had moved yet. I messaged Nora while Arjun separated documents at the dining table carefully nearby. First, I sent rage, then sadness, then the version where I was brave. 3 messages, blue ticks, no answer from the woman who enjoyed beginnings most. After 20 minutes, I opened the birthday group chat and found the gap. Nora had left without goodbye, without explanation, without even a final emoji there. That absence landed harder than Camille, Layla, or Arjun had managed today somehow. Of course, I told myself she was overwhelmed because abandonment needed softer names. Still, the space where her name had been looked deliberately clean and final. I called Matteo from the underground platform because home felt occupied by consequence. He answered on the 4th ring, careful before he knew my first word. He said things had become complicated and public in ways nobody intended tonight. I heard retreat forming under his concern, polished and cowardly around the edges. He said we should not make each other's lives harder right now together. Right now meant forever, but I pretended not to translate it aloud then. I told him he had started the toast, and he blamed champagne again. Of course he did not deny us, only reduced us to bad timing. That reduction was worse than denial because it made me ordinary again suddenly. I watched myself understand that Matteo had loved danger, not consequence after all. He offered no plan, no shelter, no sentence that included tomorrow either today. Back home, Arjun had moved his documents into a black messenger bag already. He did not ask whom I called, which offended me more deeply somehow. On the kitchen counter, he had written instructions for utilities and groceries neatly. Marriage had become a checklist because I had made conversation impossible there entirely. I read the list twice looking for cruelty and found competence instead there. That was worse because competence had been his love before I mocked it. Before midnight, I refreshed my post and counted the reactions slowing down painfully. 2 supportive comments, 6 silent friends, 1 sister-in-law who had blocked me. Arjun's side of the wardrobe waited open, clean, and already decided completely tonight. I stood there holding my phone like it could still summon witnesses somehow. The flat stayed quiet, and the quiet no longer belonged to him alone. Of course, consequence arrived at work because private rooms had stopped holding anything. I watched myself enter HR after a client call, still wearing presentation lipstick. Camille sat beside the director, hands folded like someone protecting professional distance now. 2 chairs, 1 envelope, no friendly face waited anywhere around that table anymore. The woman near the door asked whether I was Zofia Markova Meta today. My married name sounded borrowed suddenly, like clothing left after another woman overnight. She handed me a petition for dissolution of marriage with temporary financial orders. The papers also requested exclusive use of the marital home until the hearing. The temporary orders hearing was listed for October 14th, 9:30 that morning. I placed both hands flat on the table because they would not stay still. Of course, I wanted to say this was dramatic, unnecessary, performative cruelty again. But Arjun was not there, and absence made his choice feel stronger anyway. The petition named the birthday video, Matteo's screenshots, and my public post online. It named Hugo's time-stamped recording from the toast and restaurant corridor footage too. Nothing was new, which made everything worse than any surprise evidence could ever. These were only my own moments, arranged without my preferred lighting afterward now. Camille said the agency had reputational concerns because clients had started asking questions. I told her marital pain should not become a workplace performance review today. She said senior crisis advisors could not weaponize public channels without professional consequences. Of course, I heard betrayal, though she was only naming the room again. My old language failed there, polished words sliding off neutral faces completely around. I said Arjun was controlling the story because he had controlled everything else. The HR director asked whether the documents misrepresented anything material or factual there. That was the exact moment my version stopped landing anywhere useful for me. I could accuse tone, timing, coldness, and cowardice, but not the dates anymore. Before I left, Matteo sent one message and removed his profile picture completely. He said he could not be involved in my domestic situation anymore now. Domestic situation. 2 words, 1 knife. No romance left inside them at all. Later, I learned he gave a careful statement through his own solicitor afterward. He confirmed the relationship, denied promises, and called the toast regrettable drunken conduct. Of course, regrettable meant he planned to survive cleanly without me attached anymore. Arjun exited first through paper, silence, and half an empty wardrobe upstairs already. I moved into a serviced apartment near the station with 2 suitcases alone. The joint account stayed restricted to ordinary expenses until the hearing date arrived. Layla blocked me, Tamsin stopped inviting me, and Nora never returned again completely. Matteo deleted every tagged photograph and told people nothing serious had existed between us. The agency removed me from client-facing crisis accounts during their internal review immediately. I watched myself unpack party decorations because no better box was available anymore. The flat smelled of detergent, train dust, and cold takeaway noodles that night. Of course, I had called it honesty when people were watching me there. I had called it freedom when Matteo made my husband look small publicly. I had called it survival when I posted before anyone could answer properly. But being seen did not save me, because witnesses belonged to consequences anymore. It gave Arjun proof, Matteo distance, Camille caution, and Nora a door open. 2 speeches, 1 post, no room left where I sounded innocent anymore there. In the storage box, the silver cake knife still held candle wax tonight. I became impossible to ignore, and that was how I lost the person staying.